What is here? Well, if we take a catalog, an inventory, we might say, well, the Hillside Club is here, other people are here, the lights are here, your body is here, right? Your thoughts are here, your emotions are here, whatever other sort of little subtle experiential flavors that are floating around in the background is here. All these things are here. And this is what we usually focus on. If you say, what's going on, you would answer, well, I'm sitting in the Hillside Club and there's, I'm sitting on it in a gold-colored chair and there's a bunch of people around me and there's a talk going on. And that's how we usually relate to our experience, as having all these various conditions present. Of course, we're there too, but we usually just assume that's transparent. We usually assume, well, of course I was there, because I'm always here. But is any of that really true? What is really here, right now? I mean, I don't mean philosophically, I mean in actuality. What is it that is really here? Suppose you're dreaming. Suppose you're dreaming, let's say you're dreaming you're standing in Times Square and you're talking to somebody. So in that case, what's there? Well, it looks like Times Square is there, the person you're talking to is there, your body in the dream is there, and you're having a conversation and you may be thinking things and feeling things and all that seems to be there too. But then you wake up and you realize none of that was really there. It was a dream. Nothing was there. What was actually there when you were dreaming? What was there? Dreaming was there, just dreaming. What is here right now? What is it that's actually here? What's actually here is, we could call it experiencing, is actually here. What is that? Well, we usually think experiencing is just a constant in the equation. We don't even think about it. We're not interested in the fact of experiencing. We're interested in what's happening, what's going on, where we are, what the action is, right? What the story is, what the engagement is, what's the punchline, But in actuality, what is here is nothing other than experiencing. You can't be certain about any of the rest of it. You know that you're in the Hillside Club because you're having an experience which you're calling being in the Hillside Club. What does that experience consist of? It consists of, you might say, patterns of light in your vision, right? You're at a talk because you're experiencing me here talking, which is, in your field of vision is, say, patterns of light changing, and your field of hearing is, sounds that you're considering to be words. In your field of thought, you may be having thoughts that you think of as being about the words that you think you're hearing, and so on and so forth. But all of these are just qualifications of present experience. The experience is what is actually here. The experiencing is the thing that is present. And whether or not it's a Hillside Club, whether or not it's your body, whether or not it's your thoughts, whether or not it's other people and all that, is just interpretations of this present experience. Experience is a thing. We usually think of it as kind of like a window we're looking through, and we're much more interested in what we're looking at than the window. I mean, who cares about windows except window designers? People are interested in what you're seeing through the window, right? But all that there is here is the window. All that there is here is experiencing itself. And what we think is happening is just interpretations of what that experiencing seems to look like. So what is this experiencing that is present? What is it? It's something. Something's happening here, right? Your experience is obviously real, right? It's happening. It's ongoing. What is it? What is this? It's present, right? I mean, its undeniable and most obvious quality probably is that it is present. It's here. It's apparent. It is showing up. You don't need to go to it. You don't need to say, where's my experience? I left it around here somewhere. You know, it's not like that, is it? It shines forth like a spotlight shining at you. And it presents itself as all of these qualities, right? All of these colors and shapes and lights and sounds and feelings and textures and nuances of thought and emotion and all different sorts of, characteristics that are apparently present. What are these characteristics made of? What is experience made of? And it's very subtle, it's very slippery, isn't it? What is thought made of? What is vision made of? What is touch made of? It is, if you look very closely, you'll find it's a subtle, instantaneous, sort of an energy presence. It's very dynamic. It sort of tingles. It has a little sparkle to it, a little tingle. You look at light, and it's shining, it's sparkling, right? It's sizzling in your field of vision. You look at your thoughts. What is thought? If you just look at thought, what's a thought made of? What's the stuff of thought? Well, it's very subtle, isn't it? It's very tenuous, but it's not nothing, because you can tell it's there. When you're thinking, something is there, or you wouldn't know, you wouldn't be experiencing anything. You experience something when you're thinking, right? So what is it? Again, it's a subtle kind of a little tingling presence, isn't it? The same with sound. Sound could be described as kind of a buzzing presence, or a zzz. It's a vibratory presence, and it's dynamic, isn't it? If sound wasn't dynamic, you wouldn't hear anything. If it was just, it's moving, it's vibrating, it's pulsating. Light, likewise. Light is it's alive, it's vibrating, it's scintillating. Thought is the same way. Again, thought is difficult to look at because it is so subtle. But thought's a lot like light, isn't it? It's sort of a little sort of a scintillating, subtle sort of a vaporous flavor or something that's present. But if you look at what is actually present as you experience, you will find it's one thing. Just like if you look at a dream and you notice you're dreaming, what is a dream? What is dreaming? What is the stuff of a dream? It's one thing. A dream's one thing. If you see someone in a dream and you hear someone in a dream, the seeing and the hearing aren't two different things. It's all just the same dreaming. It's all just one thing present that has a range of sort of apparent characteristics that it can seem to appear in, right? And isn't the same thing true here? Your field of vision is present in the same way as your field of hearing, which is present in the same way as your field of touch, which is present in the same way as your field of thought, and so on and so forth, right? And you can feel these things, you can explore these things because they are present. They are actual. You are already engaged with them. They're right here. You don't need to go to them. You don't even need to look for them. They're very obvious, right? They shine forth. They're very clear and concrete in your experience, right? Your experience is your engagement with your experience is you're already in complete contact with your experience, right? There's no gap between you and your experience, is there? It's not like your experience is over here somewhere and you're like somewhere way over here and you have to build a bridge every time you want to experience something. It's not like that, is it? It's here. It's like how far, when you're dreaming, how far away is the dream? Well, you're in it, aren't you? I mean, it's right here. You're already completely, intimately engaged with it. And likewise, here's your experience. I'm not talking about abstractions. This is your experience right here, right now, isn't it? I mean, just look at it. Look, this is your experience. It's really happening, isn't it? It's present. And it is immediately present, right? You're completely engaged. You can't not be engaged in your experience, can you? You can't turn it off. You can't make it go away. I mean, you could drift off to sleep or something, or take some drugs or something, but you'd still be experiencing. It would just be a different quality, a different texture. Sleep is an experience. It's just a different, apparition, a different presentation of experience, isn't it? But you can explore what this experience is, not by analysis, not by thinking about it, because that just generates abstraction, but you can explore it textually. You can explore it by feeling it. Like how do you explore water? You put your hand in it, you put your foot in it, you get in it and swim around. And then you know very intimately what water is. It's not a thought, it's not an abstraction, is it? It's very concrete. But a person who's never seen water, who's never been swimming, is going to have a very different idea of what water is than you do if you've been in it, if you've had a bath, if you've gone swimming, right? And this is not an abstraction. It's not an idea. It's not, I've had it described to me. I can really talk about it. It's not like that, is it? You know about water very, very, very intimately, texturally, through immersion, through direct contact. And likewise, you can know about your experience, what your experience actually is, through direct contact. Now, this is valuable and important. For one reason. Your experience is real. It's actual. So getting to know what it is getting to know what you are, getting to know what's really going on here. All of these abstractions and descriptions of what your experience is are not real. They're not true. They're concepts. You're not in the Hillside Club. You're not in Berkeley. There are no other people around you. You're not in your body. That's not what's actually happening. What's actually happening is the field of your experience. That you may be used to describing in those terms, but those descriptions are abstractions. They are not concretely true. Whereas the presence of the full field of your experience is a concrete, undeniable, objective fact. It's the only fact. It's the only objective reality, is the fact of your experience. So, getting to know your experience through direct textual engagement, through feeling it, through exploring it non-conceptually, irrationally, through just being with the textures of it, is very fruitful. Because you can come to know what you are, you can come to know what this is, and what this actually is and what you actually are turns out to be profoundly valuable and extremely powerful, vastly more so than the normal misunderstanding of, we're humans, we're sort of evolved primates, sort of clever monkeys who wander around on some tiny dot of a planet in some little corner of some galaxy somewhere off in a small portion of the universe. I mean, that abstraction is useless. It's disempowering. It's belittling. You are the totality of reality. The sun exists because it appears in your experience. The sun is a very small part of you. Berkeley exists because it appears in your experience. The human race exists because it appears in your experience. So you're bigger than the human race. You're bigger than the planet Earth. You're bigger than Berkeley. You're bigger than the sun. You are an actuality that is drastically different, drastically divergent from what people usually think they are, and from what people usually talk about themselves and us as being. And so discovering this fact directly and exploring it directly is very empowering, and turns out to be liberating too. Because another aspect of what you actually are, what this field of experience actually is it's eternal. It's outside of time. Space and time exist inside of your experience. Your experience doesn't exist in space and time. Your experience exists, and space and time appear within it. So the fact that you're outside of space and time is very interesting. That means Among other things, you were never born. You're not going to die. That's kind of interesting information if you think about it, compared to the way we normally approach our situation. And many, many other implications, because also, not only is it outside space and time, but it's infinite. This is very interesting. Infinite sounds like an abstraction. It sounds like a nebulosity. It sounds like just some kind of hyperbole. It's like infinity is like, oh yeah, whatever. But infinity is an actuality. Infinity means without limit, without boundary, without ultimate definition, without bottomless, you might say. Well, bottomless is hard to imagine, because you imagine like a cliff or a ravine like the Grand Canyon. You imagine, well, it's really deep. Imagine it was deeper. And you imagine, okay, it's bottomless. You can't really imagine bottomless. You can get to really, 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 really deep, sort of so that the bottom is just sort of so far down there that it's irrelevant, but still somewhere there's a bottom. But think of bottomless, like just no bottom at all, just no bottom. I mean, think of outer space. They call it free fall. Suppose you're just heading away from Earth at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and if you don't hit another star, you're not going to hit anything forever. You're just falling forever. And that's actually very true to what your situation actually is right now, because there is no walls to your experience. There's no floor to your experience. Your experience is not sitting on something. Your experience is not sitting in something. Everything whatsoever is in your experience, or it's nowhere. And your experience is beyond what appears within it. All of this is directly knowable, directly experienceable, simply by looking and seeing what is actually concretely present as this amazing fact that we call experience. And you will be able to see what it is as long as you can approach it outside of the context of what you have been taught it is and what our philosophies and so on generally hold it to be. What I call this that is present, I call it radiant presence. Not because it is that, but because that indicates in a very profound way some of its major characteristics. It's radiant. By radiant, I don't mean just light or glowing. I mean that it dynamically shines forth. It dynamically projects itself. Experience comes to you, doesn't it? It's not sitting out there inertly. You don't have to go to it. It jumps out at you, right? Your field of vision is bang, it's here in your experience dynamically, instantaneously. Same with thought, same with sensation. All of these things jump forth continually in real time. So I coined this property radiance and presence because it is present. This is probably the prime characteristic of experience, is that it is present. Which is it's a synonym for actual. And actual means objectively existent, here, undeniable, in your face, so to speak, in the more street vernacular. So anyway, and I call this exploration the yoga of radiant presence. And I commend it to you as a very valuable and fascinating vehicle of exploration that is the exploration and discovery of what this is, what you actually are. And the fruit of that investigation is profound and astounding.
So I was wondering, as you were speaking, if you make a distinction between the experience and the experiencer. If we are saying that reality is in a way generated by our experience or made present by our experience, are we made present by our experience? Are we separate from it, or are we simply experience?
Well, you can look and see, can't you? Experience is. And anything that is seems to be, or can be said to be, because experience is. So the world exists because experience is. My body exists because experience is. We can get into the nuance of, well, there's experience, so is there an experiencer? We're used to thinking that way. We're used to, obviously, the sort of common conceptualization is, well, there's me that's experiencing experience, and then there's experience which is being experienced, and somehow they're different from each other or separate from each other. But if you look, you can't really find an experiencer separate from experience, and you can't ever find experience separate from a so-called experiencer. I mean, experience is being experienced, let's say. I think that it boils down to that the conundrum of experience versus experiencer is generated by logic. And I think it's a semantic problem, really, because I think if we just called it experiencing instead of experience that is being experienced, which implies an experiencer, that's kind of it's an implication of that way of putting it. But if you just say there's experiencing is present, well, how is it present? Well, it's miraculous. Who knows? I mean, you can't say, can you? And once you see the fact of that, then you don't need an experiencer. Is it subjective? Sure, there's infinite degrees of subjectivity. Is it objective? Sure, there's infinite degrees of objectivity. And can you make any meaningful distinction between subjectivity and objectivity in any experience? And I think you'll find you can't. Because there's always a degree of objectivity, let's say characteristics, being presented experientially, right? Like, for example, in vision, there's color and shape and so on and so forth, which could be said to be relatively objective, and yet they are existing in a clear space of awareness somehow that could be said to be more subjective. But can you actually take the characteristics and take the field of awareness and separate them, Does the field of awareness ever exist without characteristics? And do characteristics ever exist without the field of awareness? And I think you'll find that they don't. So it's really more just a discovery of the dimensionality of experience. So experience has dimensions of characteristics. Experience has dimensions of what we might call awareness, and so on and so forth. But all of these are aspects of essentially one condition, I think you'll find.
Just to take it a little further, I find that anytime I look for the experience or try to understand what experience is, up pops the experiencer. In other words, any effort that I make, whatever, automatically assumes or actually creates this idea of experiencer. The only way that I can resolve the two is not to do anything. If I don't do anything, I go to sleep, perhaps, or get drunk or something. But it seems like extending that, almost any kind of practice, almost any kind of spiritual practice, all sadhana, is creating this dichotomy. And how to avoid that is the question.
Well, it sounds to me like you're getting into the whole issue of doership. So the notion of if there's something being done, how is it being done? There must be some doer, some intentionality, some at least focus of intention that is defining something as being done, at least defining it into existence, if not actually affecting it in some engineering way, right? But again, I think this is more a logical and a semantic conundrum than an actual conundrum, because if we look for doership, we can't find it. How does anything happen? Is anything actually being done? And if we look very closely, like it may seem like, oh, I'm doing something. I am going to, practice the sadhana of drinking chai. So am sitting in my chair, I have a chai cup next to me, I take my hand, I reach it over, and I pick up the chai cup and I take a sip. So that's chai practice, right? And I'm doing it, right? I mean, logically, if I put it in those terms, that's the argument, putting it in those terms. But in actuality, where does the urge to do that come from? Where does the controlling factors that make muscles move come from? Where does the presence of chai to be drunk come from? And if I go looking for all of these things, I think that I will find there are unanswerable questions in actuality. So if I oversimplify it by giving it a description as, oh, I'm doing this and this is here to be done and then I'm doing it, the description implies that there's doership. But I think that is a logical and a semantic construction rather than the actual fact of what we might call the flow of events, which is ultimately inscrutable because events are spontaneously occurring, all events. I mean, you can look at it sort of experientially. So any practice that you might do is taking place in the field of your experience, which means it's going to show up as the presence of some energetic qualities in your field of experience. So if you're going to do something physically, then this is going to somehow involve something that's either felt or seen or experienced sensorially in some way, right? If you're doing something mentally, then this is going to be some kind of a supposed relationship with some kind of mental events or so on and so forth. But if we look at the flow of mental event, the flow of sensory event, it's an unstoppable spontaneity, isn't it? I mean, and it's not being done. You're not putting light into your field of vision. And the degree to which your field of vision modulates, like if I turn my head, all of a sudden our field of vision goes and everything's very different looking, right? And I can say, oh, I did that. But if I look very closely at how that happened, where it came from, where the impulse to do it came from, and all of that, it ultimately reveals itself as inscrutable. And the "oh, I did that" is just a vast oversimplification. It's an empty claim. I'm claiming to have done it. I can't find how I did it. I can't even find what was done. And I certainly can't find the me that supposedly did it. I mean, if I said, I did it, okay, fine. Find this I. And, so none of the terms of any of these claims are actually findable as actualities. So they're more just labels. They're more just semantic constructions. I mean, I think you'll find that if you go looking at the actuality of an experiential event or sequence or whatever in the context of holding it to be describable as a sadhana or as any kind of an event at all. The actual terms that you're claiming to be involved in the transaction can't actually be defined as such, can't actually be found clearly.
Yeah, that seems to be once you take the step and you start investigating, then you realize the investigator is part of the whole. There's another thing, though, a sense of I have to attain something, I have to achieve something, and there's a kind of a low-grade guilt if I'm not doing anything.
Right.
That's sort of I need to do something, but as soon as I think I need to do something, there's two of us, and I'm in trouble. Once I get into actually observing, and I forget the need to do it, then it seems to become holistic or one unitary.
Sure. And again, the problem is defined into existence by your terms of how you're defining experience. If you need to do something to achieve something, then the something you need to do has to actually exist as a something, or as an anything even, and what you hope to achieve has to actually exist in some terms, and there has to be if that's a valid way of looking at it, then there has to be a way in which doing this action will achieve this result. And it's quite demonstrable that nothing can be achieved other than experience itself. So anything that you do, the result of it is going to be experience. And what you're starting off with is already experience. It's not going to be more experience or less experience. And it's not going to be demonstrably different experience, because experience is always absolutely different. Since each, let's call it pattern of characteristics that present as, let's call it a moment, is unique, it's as different as can be. So the exact characteristics that present right now have never appeared before and never will appear again. Is this a problem? Is this a result? Is this a great thing? Is this a horrible thing? There's no basis for answering those questions, because there's no basis for comparing the characteristics that are present in this moment with anything else. And so anything that happens in terms of these characteristics developing, like let's say, okay, we're going to do something, we're going to get up and start dancing around, and that's going to lead to some result. So we get up and start dancing around, and what's happening there was, more presence of characteristics, unique characteristics that have never happened before and will never happen again, presenting as experience. There's no basis for assessing them. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a problem? Is it a practice? Is it a result? Is it a failure? Is it a success? I mean, how can you say? Since every pattern of experience is a one-off, there's no basis for assessing, because you can't compare it to anything else, because it's unlike anything that has ever happened before or since. I mean, say a flash of light happens all of a sudden, just instantaneously, bang! And it's never happened before and it's never going to happen again. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? In what sense can that possibly be meaningful? It's a unique occurrence. You can't assess something unless there's a conceptual framework, of relative values in existence to measure it against, right? And there's no such thing, because all patterns of characteristics, let's say, is unique. So you can't. It's always apples and oranges. Is what's happening right now better or worse than what happened exactly 24 hours ago? Well, you can't say. You can say it looks different. Does it look better? I don't know. Does it look worse? I don't know. Oh, but no, this is wonderful. This is a sacred moment. What does that mean? Relative to what? It's just, it's a flash of a pattern that's never occurred before. How can you assess it? It's mind-boggling. It's bewildering. I mean, that's all you can really say. And that is always the case. So if you do something and arguably leads to a result, or fails to lead to a result, or you don't do it, you're still always in a condition of a unique, spontaneous presentation, which is unaccessible. In actuality, so all of this assessing and, aspiration and wanting to achieve some goal and failing to achieve a goal or failing to embark on the practice that's going to achieve you the goal and all of that is just imaginary. It's just spin doctoring. You're pretending that you have enough of a handle on what's actually happening in any pattern, in these patterns of presentations, to be able to assess it accurately. And that's bullshit. That's an empty claim. You can't, if you can't say what's happening now accurately, then you can't say what's ever happening. And if you can't say what's happening, how can you possibly assess it? And you cannot say what's happening right now. It cannot be done. So how can it be assessed? Without just going into pretense, without just going into wild spin doctoring. I mean, you become a politician or something. These are our great days. This is the, here we are in the bosom of liberty and freedom. What? I mean, this is just empty hyperbole. Compared to what? Based on what?
At least we can have hope.
Yes, we have hope. We have great hope.
Well, what? When I run through this line of logic, unfortunately, what I come up with is that it may be that the whole idea of spiritual attainment is a myth.
Of course.
And the idea of fixing anything is a myth.
Of course.
So I rest my case.
Have at it. Rest away.
Let me pass this thing to somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, you're always in an inconceivable, undescribable, unanalyzable condition that never fundamentally changes. I mean, the basic event of what's happening here is the same basic event that's always been happening. Call it presence of experience or presence of reality or whatever. And it always looks different, uniquely. So in every instant, it presents itself in an absolutely unique way that it has never presented itself as before and will never present itself as again. So it's unaccessible in terms of the pattern of how it presents. And yet what it is never changes. The beingness, the presence of experience right now is exactly the same presence of experience that was there when you were 2. And it's exactly the same presence of experience that's going to be there when you're on your deathbed, or for that matter, 1 week after your death. Because what this looks like always changes and is absolutely ungraspable, and what it is never changes and is absolutely ungraspable.
So there's nothing to attain and there's no way to attain it, but at least it's never boring.
Yeah, it's never boring, and it's already attained. I mean, anything you could attain would be this, that is already the case and has always been the case. And anything that you attain in terms of, apparition of circumstances would be instantaneously gone in the next instant anyway, because the pattern of characteristics is absolutely dynamic, absolutely unstable, and absolutely unresolvable. It never actually crystallizes or stabilizes into anything coherent that you could define anyway, and it's already gone. As soon as it happens, it's gone. So anything you achieve, it's already gone. It's like, I mean, look at human affairs. Anything that's ever been achieved, where is it now? Where are the Great Pyramids? Where's the Treaty of Versailles? Where's this? Where's that? It's like, just, like sands through the hourglass. So are the days of our lives.
One of my favorite sayings, I'm just compelled to say this, Winston Churchill's definition of history is just one damn thing after another.
Ain't it the truth? Except for the one damn thing part and the after another part.
Hi, Peter. Good to be here.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. So what I... Is that... Okay. What I've been noticing during the sitting times and other times, everything that I think of, everything that I've desired, that I have not desired, of course, and as I get older, I'm 54, there's more and more, the trail of experience increases. There's more memories every day, every moment. And most of it's just a variation on a few basic themes. Mm-hmm. But as I look at that, it's all just, it's so ungraspable. It's memories and images. There's nothing to it. I mean, other than what the mind is presenting as reality. It's fascinating, really, how that works. And I'm just exploring that. Mm-hmm. But it's so... It's like fog. You can't, but yet it arises with such vigor, and a certain spin is put on images and things. Mm-hmm. But you look at it, it's just vapors, and mm-hmm. that is truly fascinating. Just how that works. The interplay between that which is just there and all of this history, the personal and the transpersonal, or whatever you want to call it. So that's just totally out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. It is, this allegation of meaningfulness, this allegation of interpretation is amazing to see, because as you observed, that what is present but is not coherent. It doesn't stabilize as anything. It doesn't come together as anything that you can really define or find or resolve as being anything in particular, definitely, and yet it unendingly presents itself, and it unendingly has all of these implications of meaningfulness. Even though the meaningfulness, again, never actually resolves, nonetheless, it keeps shining forth. It keeps expressing itself.
Yeah, are you familiar with the Sanskrit term rasa?
Yeah, sure.
It's like a tone or flavor. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the way it strikes me is it's just a series of rasas. Like today, coming up here on the bus, it had the way the clouds were. It reminded me of a New England autumn day. And there's just a rasa in that, a sort of stillness and...
Yes, and yet, even as these rasas present themselves with amazing dimensionality and depth, they never resolve. They never actually cohere into anything, reliably specific, or reliably coherent, or reliably stable. They're always a kind of an implication, and if you go looking for the implication, trying to pin it down, it's like a mirage. It just recedes. And yet, it's not nothing.
That's right.
Yeah, it's astounding. Right. And all the characteristics of experience are like that. Even our most arguably concrete qualities of experience, what you happen to be seeing in exactly the moment, what you happen to be hearing in the moment. I mean, right here, right now, it's undeniably present. It's incredibly detailed. And, explicit, and yet you go try and find what anything is, pin anything down with any precision, and again it just opens up and does not resolve. Nothing actually comes together into coherence. Everything just opens, and it's an astounding fact that experience is like that, reality is like that. It presents itself with such a density of meaningfulness, such a density of information, and yet none of it actually coheres or resolves or has any stability or any actual entityhood. It doesn't come together as anything coherent. And you'll find this across the board, absolutely across the board. And yet it's not nothing. So it's not anything and it's not nothing. It's a very strange state of affairs.
Yeah.
And yet it's actual. This is real. This is.
The vividness of it is not anything objective. It's just the whole package. It's just the display.
And yet it is the truth of objectivity. That's what objectivity actually is this display. And yet you go try and pin it down and it evaporates like a mirage. Yeah, absolutely. And you will find this across the board, anywhere you look within your experience, on any dimension of your experience, you find this in terms of memory, in terms of thought, in terms of very subtle sort of experiences. You find this in terms of very concrete experiences, sensory experience, so on and so forth. The same principle is always fully the case.
Like last month when I was here, somebody asked about the functions of the mind, basically referring to the skandhas of feeling, perception, and so forth. Looking for that, I can't distinguish how each of those aspects are really working. It's too subtle.
And you can't even distinguish the aspects as discrete. Because anything whatsoever turns out to be an empty claim. Even that there is skandhas, that there are senses, that there are tendencies, that there is anything, turns out to be an empty claim. You can look at it that way, but then when you look a little more closely at what's actually present, you can't actually find it as such. And again, across the board, this proves to be the case. Basically the less said about experience, the more truthful you are. As soon as you say anything, it turns out you're asserting things which are actually, explicitly and obviously not the case.
Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Back again briefly. That raises a question that a real practical question that I have, and that is that when I use the kind of discrimination that you're describing, this seems to conflict with the practical side of life, so to speak, the things where you have obligations. Say you're an artist and you sit and you sculpt out heads of marble, and you love this and you're deeply involved in it. Is it possible to have this vision and also have this kind of commitment or involvement or absorption in some? You see what I'm saying?
Of course, because all of the degrees of, let's call them practicalities, turn out to be instances of exactly what I'm talking about. All of these, anything you do turns out to be actually just inscrutable when you look at it, and it turns out to be not what you thought it was. It includes aspects and dimensionalities and so on that completely transcend what you think is happening. In other words, you can't ever say what's actually happening, and what is actually happening always completely transcends what you think is happening. We have practicalities. We have to work. We have to make money. We have to get to work. We have to get in the car. We have to do this. Well, how do you get in a car? How do you drive a car? What's a car, you know? Well, we can do it, but what is it we're doing when we do that? And what is we that is doing it? And so every one of these questions, as soon as you ask them, if you honestly look at it, reveals the fact that it's not quite like that. It's not really the way I've been describing it. I've been describing it as if I knew what these things were and they were concrete and coherent, but they aren't. And yet, you can get in a car. You can drive somewhere. You can do something. And yet, that's not what's actually happening. And what is actually happening, well, you can't say. But you don't need to say because you can do. And when you do, you don't need to describe it. I mean, it's like in a dream, you know. In a dream, all sorts of things happen. How do they happen? And what is happening? Well, you can't say how anything happens in a dream, and you can't even say what is happening in a dream, because what is happening completely transcends whatever you say is happening. And yet it happens anyway, so who cares? What difference does it make? In other words, living does not depend upon description. And our descriptions are always partialities. So, any narration of, oh, I have to go do this, blah, 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 is hopelessly shallow. And yet, that doesn't prevent the action from taking place, such as it is.
I found that when I begin, I don't really go lucid in a dream, or at least I don't have memories of it, but when I begin to realize that I'm dreaming, the dream breaks. I mean, I can't stay there. The dream just disappears. As soon as I've seen it's a ghost, the ghost disappears.
Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah. And this illustrates the way in which interpretation and sort of an unconscious or preconscious narrative actually defines events into existence. And if you don't supply that, events can be very different and very tenuous and literally dissolve. I mean, in a profound sense, the condition of liberation or realization is like that. When you stop defining yourself as being a human being and existing in a body and existing in space and time and being subject to birth and death and cause and effect and so on, those things disappear because they were never there. They're assertions that cannot actually be found as such. But that doesn't mean everything goes away. Nothing stops. Nothing is actually different than it ever was, because it never was actually that way. And yet, so everything is, you're in the strange condition where everything's exactly the same and everything's entirely different. Because what this is completely transcends our descriptions of it. And this is self-evident, events, I mean, just if you look at information density, events are hopelessly too complex, too rich, too information-rich to be encompassed accurately by descriptions or comprehensively by descriptions. This is just common sense. It's just completely obvious. So here we have these inconceivably pithy actualities occurring. So, as whatever they actually are, whatever that actually is, which completely transcends any description we're going to throw at them. And that's self-evidently always the case anyway. So why not just acknowledge that fact? Why not just acknowledge how pathetic our descriptions are, how pathetic the worldviews implied by our semantic systems are, and just let go into actuality. Because, of course, we don't depend upon description to live. Life doesn't depend upon description. Life is doing itself. Life is not sustained by description. And in fact, it's arguably more directly accessible in its richness if you forego an addiction to a description.
Thank you for that.
I get lost in some of the train of thought where you've just been along the lines of, so what is the necessity of doing anything? And I wonder where you take that.
Well, what is the necessity of doing anything? Is it possible to not do anything?
Doesn't seem like it is.
Yeah, so I mean, where does necessity really enter into it in any terms that we can talk about? I mean, you know, your heart beats, you're breathing, you're going to get hungry sooner or later, and you're going to probably go off and search for food. You're going to get tired and pass out or find a place to sleep or go home or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And these things happen. You know, and you participate in them the way that you do according to the system that you are, according to your nature, you know, and so on and so forth. So this is already an ongoing system doing itself. So looking at it in terms of needing of things needing to be done or not is kind of artificial. Life doesn't need to be lived, and yet it is being lived. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, is when life is living, is something being done? Is something not being done? I mean, why even look at it in those terms? It's just an ongoing unfoldment of an absolutely inscrutable system being itself, you know. Mm-hmm. Your life is living itself, which has always been the case, and it's a direct fact. It's a direct ongoing flow of events. It's doing itself. It doesn't require any intervention. In fact, it's not particularly amenable to intervention, is it? I mean, you can't just be someone else because you want to. You can't have another life just because you think you could or should or it would be interesting.
I guess a lot of what we seem to do with these evenings is try to understand.
Sure.
And that's a fascinating thing to do, and I like to do it and all that, and then sometimes it seems so completely futile as to not even start that.
Yeah. And yet discovering the actuality of this futility is actually a kind of a deep understanding, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So it's maybe moving into a more mature engagement of understanding that's not a logical understanding, it's not a descriptive understanding, it's an understanding of participating in how amazing this is, how astounding this is, how ungraspable and open-ended this is, and yet it's actual. So it's explorable, it can be engaged with very profoundly outside of the context of logic, outside of the context of conceptualization or description. And you begin to do this when you see the futility of description.
Right.
Because life doesn't go away in that context. Intelligence doesn't go away in that context. And intelligence turns out not to depend upon concepts. You don't need to have a conceptual flow or using conceptual structures to be intelligent. You know, you can be very directly engaged with things in a very non-linear, irrational way. And we are all the time in our lives. I mean, anything we're good at, suppose you're a good cook or a good artist or you can paint well or anything that you do well, you don't do that by thinking about it. That's not an idea. How do you do it? Well, you just do it by being it. Your life force just does it. It's a miraculous power, right? And it transcends. I mean, if you suppose you're an inspired painter, and then you're painting, you may be thinking while you're painting, but in actuality, there's something going on that is very irrational and very direct, but it's intelligent. It's not just stupid. You're not just throwing paint at a canvas. it's probably very participatory and, very, very meaningful, but not necessarily in a rational way, is it?
No.
I mean, that's just one arbitrary example. But all across the board, we are engaged with our lives very intelligently, but not conceptually all the time. And, probably the biggest challenge in spirituality is that we are such semantic creatures, and we're being constantly bombarded by all these words and concepts and descriptions. And so it's easy to be distracted and to think that that's where the action is, that that's where we have to be responsive, that's where we have to be participating. And in actuality, that is, that's the shallow end of human action. And that's the shallow end of human intelligence, too. Inspiration and insight don't happen on a level of concepts. Inspiration and insight happens irrationally. It may or may not percolate into concepts and so on and so forth, but that's not where it occurs. And inspiration and insight are profoundly intelligent.
And they don't necessarily seem to have to get anywhere.
Exactly so. Yeah. Life doesn't need to get anywhere. Life is life. And yet life being life is arguably getting somewhere, because that's the only where to get, really. You're not going to get anywhere else. But the question is there any limit to the depths? Is there any limit to the richness of life? And the answer turns out to be no. So life can get nowhere and still be unendingly expanding, growing, moving into increasing richness, increasing depth, increasing meaningfulness, without necessarily getting anywhere.
Right, yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I think this is a conceptual question, but when you use the example of dreaming versus not dreaming, I wondered if it matters at all whether there's a difference between the two?
Not at all. I mean, frequently when I use the example of dreaming, I do so because that's a context, that's a clear example within everyone's experience of a context that seems to be objectively the case, and yet when you wake up or go lucid or whatever, you come to see quite clearly that, wow, I thought I was in this world, I thought all these things were happening, and it wasn't really like that. And correspondingly, in our waking condition, there's something very similar going on, but it's difficult for us to see that because we don't have the experience of waking up from the waking condition where we could look back on it and say, wow, that seemed to be really real, but it wasn't. We don't typically have that because when we leave the waking condition, we go to sleep, which is not a condition where we can exercise a lot of analysis or reason or insight, typically.
So there's not necessarily a qualitative difference between the two?
No. In fact, there's very little qualitative difference. There's arguably some. Within the context of dream, there is arguably a different kind of fluidity, let's say, than within the waking condition. But the waking condition is actually absolutely fluid. If you're sensitive to your actual flow of experience, every instant, everything, all these nuances are constantly changing and fluctuating and flowing. And of course, again, typically we may not be in the habit of noticing this because we're typically more likely to be fixated on particular activities or events or interpretations. But if you really, for example, if you've ever tried meditating, it can be very interesting. Sort of just sit for a half an hour and do absolutely nothing and just watch your experience. And beginning meditators, will just be astounded. 10 minutes into the meditation, it's like, wow, so much is happening. I'm just sitting here, and there's just all of this stuff coming and going and slipping, and this is changing, and I'm here, and I'm there. You feel like you're being thrown around by a sumo wrestler or something when nothing's happening. You're just sitting there. And because you are in a context where it's easier to notice this amazing eventfulness, this amazing dynamism and fluidity that are our experience and our waking experience actually consists of. So basically, I mean, I think you'll find if you look that all experience is the same. Even deep sleep is actually very much like what's happening here. You know, it looks quite different in most regards, but it's essentially the same event. I think you'll find that there's only one condition. That is always the case. And it has sort of different dominant resonant modes that it appears in. So it appears in what we might generally classify as a waking condition or a dream condition or a deep sleep condition or an after-death condition or whatever. I mean, who knows? These kind of arbitrary classifying these things. But so there's this one condition, you know, which you could call your experience or your being or whatever. And it presents itself in these different sort of dominant modes. And because these modes have such, you know, in many regards, very different characteristics from each other, it's easy to think of them as very different. And also, we typically follow our interpretations and our narrations and our descriptions of what's going on, so which we can do much more powerfully in the waking condition. So we're typically waking state chauvinists. We typically think, well, the waking state is real, the waking state matters, and all these other states are just sort of, they happen from time to time, but they're not particularly important. They're just quirky aspects or addendums to the waking state, which is the real world, you know. But in actuality, you know, when you get down to experiencing this condition more directly and let go of experiencing it in terms of descriptions and definitions and so on, you come to see that the way in which this condition is always the same. And it's the condition that's important, not what it looks like. So the fact of what we call experience, let's call it the presence of the field of experience, or I call it the field of radiant presence. So this fact is the important fact, and it's a fact. This fact is the fact in waking condition, and deep sleep, and dreams, you know, after death, pre-birth, blah 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 blah. Anywhere you look, this condition is actuality, and it never changes. Of course, an aspect of this condition is that it always presents itself uniquely, spontaneously from moment to moment. So it seems to be continually changing, absolutely. So it's a very strange state of affairs. But nonetheless, what it is never changes. You know, if you look at your experience now and, you know, recall your experience when you were 2 years old, it's essentially, nothing's really changed. It looks different. Everything looks different, but you're still you. It's still your experience. And, essentially, as a condition, it's the same condition. And this will always be the case. And so coming to see that, you know, it's a matter of shifting the emphasis, of coming to see what's primary. What's primary for us is this condition of being an experiential field, as opposed to what most people may often think is primary is our circumstantial condition, you know, our station in life, our health, the condition of our body, our social status, our financial status, all these political status, all these various things that we're used to relating to as important. But all these conditions exist within and as tiny aspects of our experiential field, which is actually the primary event.
Why do humans do this then? Why do they have this enormous shift in focus?
It's unscrutable. We can't. Who knows? It's fascinating. I mean, that the human experience seems to gravitate so heavily to misinterpreting itself, and then eventually, in some individuals, seems to have a breakthrough into a period of questioning and perhaps discovery of their authentic condition. You know, why this happens, or what's happening when this happens, and all that is completely inscrutable. Who knows? I mean, we can observe that it seems to be something like that, but we can't say what it is or how it is. You know, it's like, why do why do plants, bear leaves and flowers in the spring? It's the pattern of life that this happens. And it's the pattern of life that, life on the human level has this tendency to lose itself in confusion of relating to itself partially, and stumbles through eventually, in the case of some individuals, to a more clear revelation or discovery of what is actually occurring.
Thank you.
I was watching a football game before I came here, and Eli Manning threw a 16-yard pass to Victor Cruz. And my question is that the same, when he was bringing his arm back and throwing it like that, is it that same energy that is causing my thoughts?
Yes, exactly the same. It's the same energy that's making the sun shine.
Okay.
It's the same energy that's holding the atoms together as gravity.
Okay. Well,
there's only one force, and that force does everything.
Right. That's good to know. We don't think about that all the time, but anyway.
Yeah. It's really good to know, actually. If you think about it, do the math. Really get the implications.
Right. Okay, and the other question was, I was driving along in my car and listening to KPFA, and the announcer said that, the commentator said that Hitler killed anywhere from 11 to 17 million people. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to ask Peter Brown if Hitler killed from 11 to 17 million people.
Well, Hitler didn't do anything. That which does everything did that and does everything.
Okay, I got it.
I mean, that which does everything kills everything.
Okay.
Everything gets killed. And what's killing everything? It's not Hitler. It's not the politicians.
Yeah.
It's life itself. Life kills life. Life kills itself.
Yeah. I thought there was something off with that thing when he said Hitler killed from 11 to 17 million
it's
people.
Personal best. Something to aspire to.
Okay.
I thought that that analogy of a low-grade feeling of guilt was kind of interesting, of the natural impulse or life wanting to get to know itself, or knowing all these things that you can't really find something, and the finding of it causes a creates something that isn't there, and yet that impulse seems to be an impulse of just natural life.
Absolutely, it's very genuine. I mean, the motive force of life, of reality, is self-exploration. It wants to know what it is, and it explores itself. And this is the motive force of our experience, of course, is this very same essential curiosity or desire to explore, to find what this is. And it does so at first in immature ways. It does so sloppily. It does so in terms of achievement and wanting to achieve, wanting to discover, wanting to own, wanting to acquire. And as it develops a greater sensitivity to what it actually is, a greater maturity, it begins to get that, well, what is going on here is not something, it's not about achievement per se, it's not about acquisition, it's about moving into greater and greater subtlety, it's about moving into exploring nuance and so on and so forth. And our experience, of course, embodies that and mirrors that. As we mature spiritually, as we mature as expressions of life force, we move from a more, immature mode of wanting self-aggrandizement, wanting pleasure, wanting, status, these various things, wanting achievement, investment in self-importance, where we have guilt and all these things and get all torqued up about our own situation and our own soap opera. And we move into a more subtle, nuanced, rich engagement with the profound, open-ended meaningfulness of what this actually is, of what is here. Which, is intrinsically more open-ended than is allowable by those kind of more heavy-handed, objectified approaches of wanting to achieve, wanting to have this, wanting to define this, wanting to avoid this, and these sort of concretizations of something that is, in actuality, very fluid and subtle and nuanced and not really concretizable. And so when it develops the maturity to be with itself in those ways, to be with itself in a more multidimensional way, then of course we embody that and we begin to let go of this spiritual immaturity, and we begin to embody a greater intelligence and a greater adaptability and multidimensionality in being with this amazing phenomena.
So it's more of a shift from a drive to awareness, becoming aware of itself in different modes, or
yeah, an appreciation. I mean, we all experience this. When there's any degree of maturing, we all experience this. We get more subtle. We get more comfortable with complexity, or with things, not being simple or not needing to be clearly defined. We get more comfortable with ambiguity. We get more comfortable with, things not being cut and dried. This is very commonplace. It's in maturity. This is an obvious characteristic that comes in, and this characteristic can come in very, very, very fully as the intelligence learns to be with itself more profoundly. It discovers this. Wow, there's this amazing richness and multidimensionality and open-endedness that's intrinsically here. And as it begins to be able to engage with itself in those modes more amorphously, less specifically, let's say, there's a greater richness, but there's a departure from this kind of linear, human, defined, embodied mode, and an entry into a more open-ended quality of engagement.
Peter, as one develops that maturity to see the richness and complexity of this, whatever it is, one also finds that there in fact is only one thing.
Yes.
And that it's simple and it's plain and there is no complexity at all.
Yes, certainly. Without it needing to be limited by that it is that, but it is also infinitely complex, infinitely subtle, and infinitely multidimensional. And that paradox is not in any way a problem or even an issue. It's just self-evidently the case.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Peter, I was sitting here tonight, and I've been interested for a long time in these underlying structures, belief systems, or early experiences, or archetypes that really govern a lot of our thinking. And I was realizing that my thinking about existence in the world really has been, I've used the metaphor of a painting for probably what we see is often more visual than anything else. Mm-hmm. But that reality, like this room, I can see it as a painting if I think of it, in terms of trying to organize it in some way. And it just occurred to me, I'd never had the thought before, or the observation before, but I was listening to the music that's very faintly going on over my right shoulder, and I realized that music doesn't have any structure. It's just an instantaneous thing which disappears, just like what you're describing. Boom, boom, it's gone before you know it.
Mm-hmm, certainly.
And yet, somehow it has profound meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And one thought that was crossing my mind is, what is the canvas on which this is painted? Because it's like the moment of experiencing just one moment of music is like the tip of a pen or a brush on the painting, but what's the canvas? But that was one of my, I fell into a dream there of intellectualism. But the idea of music being, and that has an archetypal, Saraswati is the goddess who makes everything, and she's playing her veena,
mm-hmm.
And sound and so forth. All that I really have to say is that I just realized that music is maybe a better metaphor from the point of view of what you're saying than the idea of some more structured thing like painting or sculpture.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have, I think it's easy to have a tendency to assume a stability which generally takes the form of an assumption of a stably existing objective world that our experience doesn't actually give evidence to. it's very easy to fall into that, and it's very much analogous to, the canvas, the canvas that's there that the painting is on. And because it's easy to not be sensitive to how absolutely dynamic even our visual experience is. It's easy to sit in a room like this and sit around and say, well, the room's not really going anywhere. It's not really doing much. It's kind of just sitting there. So it's kind of giving evidence to the fact that it's objectively out there and kind of basically pretty inert, But that's not true at all. It's just not true. And it's not true experientially if we notice our experience. I know you've heard many times the recommendation, the experiment that I recommend people try of sit in front of a blank, well-lit wall with nothing on it, no pictures or anything, for 5, 10, 15 minutes, half hour, an hour, and just sit motionlessly, look at that wall, and just see how still it is. See how still the experience of experiencing that wall is. And within 10 minutes, you're going to be watching a light show. The wall's going to be dancing. You're going to think someone dosed your tea or something, because you will notice how absolutely dynamic your experience is. And one of the reasons we don't typically notice how dynamic our experience is because our focus of attention is jumping around. When you're sitting around, most people, when they're sitting around in a room, you're sort of looking at this and looking at, your vision is sort of moving around. You sort of notice that and notice this, or you think of that, and so this dynamism of our focus of attention makes it easy to skim over the dynamism of our sensory experience, and we sort of assume, well, the room's not really going anywhere. But I'm just sort of taking these little snapshots of it, and in that context, it's easy to hold that the room isn't. But if I really sit and just look absolutely stably at one portion of the room, all of a sudden there's all this sort of sparklings and wigglings and movings and coming in and out, And this is not even subtle. It's grossly obvious. It's if you take the trouble to do this experiment, it'll be quite clear that that's the case. Which again reveals that there is, this metaphor of a fixed canvas, the stably existing objective world, which is kind of sitting there inertly and not really doing very much very fast. I mean, sure, it's changing, and yet it's supposedly made of atoms, but no one can see those, and they're wiggling, but they aren't really moving very much. They're just kind of it's like bullshit. In actuality, this whole thing is like a flicker of fireflies. Experientially, it is that. And so, very much so, music is, it's a really good, if you're looking for a metaphor for experience, music is a good one. Because it is absolutely dynamic. It has a structure, but it's not a structure of permanence or stability. It's a structure which invents itself spontaneously in real time and instantaneously disappears, and yet embodies a profound richness and meaningfulness and intelligence that yet is created in the instant and dissipates and disappears in the instant. It sort of does itself in real time, with no residue whatsoever. And experience is very much like that. Experience is very much like that. I mean, it's a good way to get your foot in the door of exploring the absolute dynamism of experience. I mean, experience is slippery stuff. It's absolutely slippery. I mean, when you really develop some chops and can really look at your experience very precisely, you will be astounded how there's nothing there. There's literally nothing there. Which is a bold statement, but it's the case. Anyway, it's about quitting time, so thank you all for coming. We're going to have a small little social gathering afterwards, a little refreshment, snacks, what all. You're welcome to stick around, hang out for a little while if you like, chat. So have a lovely evening and few weeks and the rest of your life.